Morning, everybody. Welcome to Four Lakes on a brisk Sunday morning. We're still not quite into full-on freezing territory, but brisk I feel like is a good term for it. Go outside, it takes a bit of your breath out of you, and you go, All right. Let me get all my sources pulled up here. There we go. All right. Once again, welcome to Four Lakes. I am pretty sure I recognize everybody, but if you don't know me, I'm Caleb Richter. I'm going with y'all through this study of Isaiah as we read about probably one of the most recognizable major prophets, at least in the what's been quoted to me in my classes as I've been growing up. Is Isaiah is definitely one of the more quoted books in the Old Testament, especially whenever it comes to the story of Jesus in the first four books. Besides the Psalms, I think Isaiah is like the second most quoted, directly quoted by Jesus and the apostles and those kind of things. So it's cool to actually go through bit by bit, chapter, section by section, and really look at what they're really pulling from in those days. So this morning we're going to be in chapter 13 mainly, chapter 13 and a little bit of chapter 14. We're starting out in Isaiah verse 13. And today, last week we talked a bit about how not only we talked about the seed of Jesse, how it comes from the stump, basically the remnant of Israel that is left after the punishment and destruction have come through. There still will be a remnant of that, and from that remnant we're going to have, it talks about a shoot from the stump of Jesse, which as we studied we recognized was King David. And then from the shoot of Jesse came a branch that we talked about will bear fruit, and as we talked about, that branch is Jesus Christ, that it will be of the line of David. He will establish the throne of David in all of those ways, that from David's lineage will come the next great king, so to speak. And so we talked about how he will come, the signs of the branch of Jesse, and all those different things. We also talked about, in the next chapter, the songs of praise that the Israelites would sing in those days, that once God's wrath has turned away, that we see that in that song that God has become their source of salvation. It is no longer the Lord is angry with us, let us fear and run away. And now we see that Isaiah speaks of a time where the Israelites will sing for joy to the Lord, and that he will become once again the one and only God. And so in chapter 13 now we turn to a different subject. We see, as it's titled there, a prophecy against Babylon. So we've seen Isaiah tell the Israelites that there will come a time where, like all of your oppressors will be driven off and that you will no longer face destruction. But now Isaiah speaks to the Israelites in a more interesting way. Still speaking about the fact that the Babylonians will get what's coming to them. But now we see Isaiah is teaching the Israelites by prophesying against Babylon. And in all likelihood, Isaiah probably, as we're going to read today, this was probably not going directly out to the Babylonian army. Isaiah probably wasn't standing on the wall and was shouting this out to all of the Babylonian army that's sitting outside of Jerusalem. But in the way of a warning towards the Babylonians, Isaiah is also going to reassure the Israelites they're going to get what's coming to them. So let's get into that. So starting in chapter 13, we're going to do verses 1, and let's break this up a little bit. Let's go down to let's do verses 1 through 5 first. If someone wants to read verses 1 through 5 in chapter 13.
Pronouncement concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amoz saw. Lift up a flag on the bare hill. Raise your voice to them. Wave the hand that they may enter the doors of the nobles. I have commanded my consecrated ones. I have also called for my warriors who boast in my eminence to execute my anger. A sound of a roar on the mountains, like that of many people. a sound of an uproar of kingdoms, of nations gathered together. The Lord of armies is mustering the army for battle.
And one more.
Oh, there's one. They're coming from a distant country, from the furthest horizons, the Lord and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole land.
All right. So here we see a prophecy against Babylon that Isaiah, son of Amos, saw. And so he talks about, raise the banner on a bare hilltop. I've commanded those I've prepared for battle. I have summoned my warriors to carry out my wrath and those who rejoice in my triumph. So here we see that God is showing the Israelites, I am not just, I am not just God of you. I am also like everything under the earth is under my command. That even though that there are these kingdoms that do not worship me, that do not uphold me as the one true creator of all, I still have sway over the whole earth. And as he says, listen, an uproar among the kingdoms, like nations massing together. The Lord Almighty is mustering an army for war, and they will come from far away lands and from the ends of the heavens. He says, it's all under my control. That when I call for an army, when I call for a force, they answer. Whoever they may be, not important, because they answer my call. God is establishing that though the kingdoms do not worship him, they answer to him. And as we're going to see, Babylon is one of those kingdoms that answered the Lord's call. Not in he came down and spoke to the king of Babylon and said, hey, go attack Jerusalem. But in the way of that it was part of his plan for the Babylonians to come and to conquer and to be there as that source of destruction, that source of punishment for the Israelites. And now he's telling the Israelites, the same is going to happen for Babylon. Because I'm not just using Babylon. Everything is part of my plan. Everything is under my control. And so if we want to continue, let's do verses 6 and let's go through, let's use verses 6 through 8. Verses 6 through 8.
Wail, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Therefore all hands will be limp, every man's heart will melt, and they will be afraid. Pangs and sorrows will take hold of them. They will be in pain as a woman's in childbirth. They will be amazed at one another. Their faces will be like flames.
Thank you. So, continuing in this vision against Babylon, it says, wail, for the day of the Lord is near. It will come like destruction from the Almighty. Oftentimes when we hear the day of the Lord, what do we think of?
His return.
His return, his second coming, yeah. Which, in our minds, in our teachings, is a day of joy and rejoicing. The day of the Lord for the Babylonians is a little different. The day of the Lord may not portray some kind of God coming down himself to punish, but more of there will be a time where the Babylonians will be destroyed. That the day of the Lord is the day that the Lord's wrath is enacted in its entirety. To the point where every hand will go limp, every heart will melt with fear. There will be no hope, there will not be. Oftentimes when armies are faced with an opposition, when they see something coming towards them, what is their first reaction? Soldiers often will clasp on to their weapons, to shields, they'll grab something to defend themselves, they'll take up arms in hopes of defending from whatever's coming. But what is going to happen when the day of the Lord comes for the Babylonians? Their hands will be limp. They will not be grasping onto anything. Every heart will melt with fear. The day of the Lord for the Babylonians will be so terrifying and so destructive that even the greatest warriors will not have anything to grasp onto. Their arms will be limp, their hands will be at their sides, and I kind of like to think that everyone's mouth will be agape. That they will see this and they will have nothing to grasp onto, nothing to even hope against the wrath of God. Terror will seize them, pain and anguish will grip them. They will ride like a woman in labor, they will look aghast at each other, their faces aflame. There will not be any bravery for the Babylonian army. An army that has pretty much had its way with the places that it has swept through, that it has conquered. They've either won the glorious victory or they've taken the treasure and gone home. But when this day comes, it will be in terror. They'll look at each other aghast, their faces aflame. They'll just be looking at each other like, what do we do? And now let's finish out this little section here. Let's do 9 through 14. 9 through 14.
Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, cruel with fury and burning anger, to make the land a desolation, and he will exterminate its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light. Thus I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will also put an end to the arrogance of the proud and abase the haughtiness of the ruthless. Through 14. I will make mortal man scarcer than pure gold, and mankind than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken from its place at the fury of the Lord of the host in the day of his burning anger. And it will be that like a hunted gazelle, or like sheep with none to gather them. They will each turn to his own people, and each one flee to his own land.
All right. See, the day of the Lord is coming. He's told them how the people were reacting that day, and now he says, a cruel day with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land desolate, to destroy the sinners within it. Is this starting to sound a little familiar to the beginning of Isaiah? With his warnings to the Israelites at first, how he talks about, I will make the land desolate, and you people will become like, what is it, a tent set up in a vineyard, like a shack in a field. It'll be totally empty and without purpose. Here we see your lands will be desolate, and I will destroy the sinners within it. And now God has expanded. Not only does he say he's in control of all the kingdoms and all the people of the earth, but of the entire universe itself. The stars of heaven and their constellations will not show light. The rising sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The Lord is not only the Lord of the earth, the Lord is Lord of heaven and earth. That there will not even be this. Oftentimes when you look up at night, you look at the sources of light in the sky. Oftentimes the stars, we don't think of them as sources of light, but even the tiniest pinpricks that we can see in the night sky will be completely blocked out. And when the sun finally comes up, when they finally go, okay, sunrise is coming, there's some hope to be had, even the rising sun will be darkened. He will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their sins. Put an end to arrogance of the haughty and will humble the pride of the ruthless. All this pride and glory that the Babylonians have gained for themselves will mean nothing. It'll be the source of their destruction. The arrogance and the pride of the ruthless will be punished. The wicked for their sins will be punished. I will make people scarcer than pure gold and more rare than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will shake from its place, the wrath of the Lord Almighty in the day of his burning anger. Here we're seeing that no one is above God's punishment. That whether it's his chosen people or the instruments of his destruction, he weeds out the wicked and he punishes the sinful. And so here I think Isaiah is trying to show the Israelites, I am a just God. Yes, I have punished you. You are feeling the sting of my punishment today. But in the future, the Babylonians will face the same persecution. And because they do things just as sinful as you have done today, they will face exactly as complete a destruction as I have promised against you. Oftentimes whenever me and my sister would get in trouble, we would always, feel not vindicated because that's a bit complicated for kids that are like 8 to 10 years old, but there was some comfort almost in knowing that your parents' punishment was equal. That since you did the same thing that was punishable, that one kid didn't receive less punishment than the other, that your parents were being fair at the very least. And that's just coming from a kid's perspective. I know that from a parent's perspective, you don't want to have one kid feel like they're favored over the other. Because as we've seen in multiple examples in the Bible, that one sibling feeling more favored than the other can lead to lots and lots of problems. Literally the first siblings we ever read about, Cain and Abel. Cain turns to the Lord and says, you give him better blessings than you do me. And the Lord says, well, did Abel follow my instructions? And Cain still can't figure out that it's not because Abel is favored over him, but it's because of how he follows their instructions. And so here we see an example of the Lord is just. The Lord is equally fair to all. Even though the Israelites are his favorite people, he will still punish sin and wickedness. And here he assures them, the Babylonians have the same punishment coming. They have turned from my ways. They do not follow my commands. So yeah, I will punish them like I punished you. And so coming to the end, well, not to the end, but the first main section of what we're going to read about of the Lord's prophecy against the Babylonians is that kingdoms come and kingdoms go, but they're still just physical walls, castles, conquests that people have. And eventually that all becomes food for the next big thing to come through. Because as we're about to read, there will come another great kingdom that the Lord is going to use as his punishment against Babylon. Excuse me. Thank you. Babylon punishment. Next big thing. Okay. So, moving on, we're going to skip ahead just a few verses. As that last verse there, let's, like a hunted gazelle, like sheep without a shepherd, they will return to their own people. They will flee to their native land. Here we see that, as you remember, the Babylonians, as they conquered Israel, they would take the people that were already there and they would move them into their own cities. So you would have these great, massive cities that were not just one people. It would be a mixture of all the different nations and people that they had conquered. And so here we see that when it comes time for the Babylonians to be driven out of their cities, to be driven out of their homes, that all the people that were part of this land will now flee to their native land. And just to give you a real quick these verses 15 and 16, the Lord promises that if anyone's captured as they flee, they will fall by the sword, and there will be no mercy for infants, and all of the houses will be looted, and the women, the children, like there will not be any mercy for these people. And so then, continuing in verse 17, we're going to see that the Lord gives a preview for who is the next instrument of destruction. So if we want to read verses 17, let's read verses 17 through 19. 17 through 19.
Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it. Their bows also shall dash the young men to pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of their womb. Their eyes shall not spare children. In Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah.
All right, thank you. So, any history buffs out there, can anyone tell me who are the Medes? I can give them another name that you might recognize right away, or in the time of historical study in this time, this kingdom, the Medes, will also be known as the Medo-Persian Empire. This will eventually become the kingdom that is ruled by such leaders as Xerxes, Darius the First, or Darius the Great. This will become the next great kingdom that will cover all the Middle East, and then even into Eastern Europe, further down into Western Asia, that the Persian Empire in its time was, again, we just start to see these kingdoms the phrase that I learned from Star Wars Episode 1, as they're fleeing from this massive fish that's trying to eat them, and another fish comes along and eats that one, and one of the main characters says, there's always a bigger fish. In this case, yes, when it comes to a kingdom that feels like it's the top of the world, it has conquered all the knowable land, and then along comes someone else and they make it even bigger. There's always a bigger fish. And here we see that the Lord is warning the Babylonians, yes, I will stir up the Medes, which at this time is a very small kingdom. Would not be known as, oh yes, they're the next up-and-coming heavyweight champ to take over the world. If you told someone, yeah, the Medes are going to conquer the Babylonians, they'd laugh at you and think that there was something wrong with your head. But isn't that just the Lord's way? Isn't that just how, I mean, with the Exodus, the Israelites were just Egyptian slaves at the time. Led them out of the land of Egypt and into the land of Canaan. And it seems that every time we hear about the Israelites fighting a battle, that they're vastly outnumbered. So hilariously so that even the people of Israel sometimes have to go to God and say, you want us to fight these guys? And yet what do we know? That the Lord was with the Israelites, that a people that have the Lord behind them, what have we to fear? If God is with us, who can be against us? And so here we see that, yes, the Lord has set up a small nation that will eventually become great, because they are the next instrument of God's vindication for the Israelites and destruction for a sinful nation that is Babylon. I will stir up against them the Medes, who do not care for silver and have no delight in gold. Their bows will strike down the young men. They will have no mercy on infants, nor will they look with compassion on children. Babylon, the jewel of kingdoms, the pride and glory of the Babylonians, will be overthrown by God like Sodom and Gomorrah. How was Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed? Completely, with fire from the heavens, fire and brimstone, where we get that term, yeah. And so here we see that the Babylonians have come into contact with different countries, different cities, that they said, okay, we can come through, we can destroy you, or you can give us money, and then we'll go away. And so the Babylonians, when faced with imminent destruction, might think that they can buy their way out of destruction. And yet what does God tell the Israelites that will come in the day? They do not care for silver, they take no delight in gold. Their sole purpose is to conquer and destroy. And so Babylon, the jewel of kingdoms, the pride and glory of the Babylonians, this prideful people that think that they are at the tip top of the world, will be overthrown by God like Sodom and Gomorrah, completely and without remorse. And so if we move on, we finish out verses 20 through 22. She will never be inhabited or lived in through all generations. There no nomads will pitch their tents, no shepherds will rest their flock, but desert creatures will lie there. Jackals will fill her house, where the owls will dwell, and there the wild goats will leap about. Hyenas will inhabit her strongholds, jackals her luxurious palaces. Her time is at hand, and her days will not be prolonged. And here we see the fairness in God's justice. God told the Israelites, only strangers will dwell in your great mansions, only the animals will come to feed in your great structures. And here the Lord even says, no nomads will pitch their tents, and no shepherds will rest their flocks. The only things that will be found in these places are scavengers, are only things that come out at night. Wild goats, hyenas, jackals, owls. There will be no point in even trying to travel through this area. It will be so desolate and devoid of any worth. And so if the Israelites were thinking, well, your punishment on us is a little worse than what you're talking about the Babylonians, these last few verses puts that to bed. It says, nope. Not even strangers, not even people who travel for a living will settle here. That's how bad it's going to be. That only the the animals that feed at night and come out in the darkest of times will even think about wandering among this place. And there we end Isaiah's prophecy against Babylon. Whenever I think about how Isaiah talks about how complete the destruction, how it will be uninhabitable, the lands that God punishes, it often makes me think of the practice of the Romans. Whenever they would come in and they would conquer a place, they would often offer these countries, these people, they would say, come join the Roman Empire, and we'll take over, we'll change everything, but you'll still get to stay there. And sometimes people took that, and then if they didn't, the Romans would come in, they would raise everything to the ground, and then what the Romans were known for doing one particular thing afterwards in the battle, and what was that? They would spread salt over the ground of the places they conquered. What would that do? Stop anything from growing. No plants would grow, there would be no nutrients in the soil, it would be completely balanced out, where even people who tried years later to come and try and reestablish this place would find no good soil to plant anything, no good structure to build any kind of buildings. They made sure that it was a warning to those around them that this destruction is so complete, we are going to make sure that no one can even use this for a millennium. And so too is that destruction so complete that no people will want to live there, and only the lowest of the low animals are going to try and come and do anything in this area. That's just a fun historical thing that came to mind when thinking about this. Any other thoughts about Babylon's destruction, about the God's justice in this chapter? All right. And so let us move on to chapter 14. We're going to be looking at about probably the first quarter of chapter 14. In the book, or in our study book, it wants us to start in verse 5, but I actually do want to start in verse 1 and read through verse 5. Or let's read verses 1 through 4. So we must read that. Chapter 14 now, verses 1 through 4.
For the Lord will have mercy on Jacob, and will still choose Israel, and settle them in their own land. The strangers will be joined with them, and they will cling to the house of Jacob. Then people will take them and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel will possess them for servants and maids in the land of the Lord. They will take them captive, whose captives they were, and rule over their oppressors. It shall come to pass in the day of the Lord gives you rest from your sorrow and from your fear and the hard bondage in which you were made to serve. That you will take up the proverb against the king of Babylon and say, how the oppressor has ceased, the golden city ceased. The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers.
Okay. So, here after Isaiah has talked about the punishment of Babylon, he reassures the Israelites once again. Your punishment will come, the Babylonians' punishment will come, but then remember, you are the chosen people of God. The Lord will have compassion on Jacob, and once again he will choose Israel. Almost as if after all this punishment stuff that God has to reassess. Okay, cool, I've got the Israelites, I've got the Babylonians, the Medes are going to come over here, and we know that's not the case. But again, he will choose Israel. That he will remember, these are my people, and he will settle them in their own land. Foreigners will join them and unite with the descendants of Jacob, and nations will take them and bring them to their own place. So here we see kind of almost a recap of what has happened before. That the kingdoms, as they welcomed in people from other lands, Gentiles, and other nations, Foreigners will join them and unite with the descendants of Jacob, and nations will take them and bring them to their own place. Just as the Babylonians conquer and bring the people into their own towns. And Israel will take possession of the nations and make them male and female servants in the Lord's land. And here we see where he promises Israel is going to get their vindication, that they will make captives of their captors and rule over the oppressors. Those who have taken slaves of Israel in the past will now be the servants of the Israelites. That what goes around comes around, in a sense. On the day the Lord gives you relief from your suffering and turmoil, from the harsh labor forced upon you, you will take up. It's interesting. I believe your version says this proverb against the Babylonians. In the NIV, it says you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. Almost that the people will feel like they're in a position to almost twist the knife a little bit with the Babylonian king. And so verse 4, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon, how the oppressor has come to an end, how his fury has ended. We will see that the Babylonians will be brought so low that even the people they have conquered now are going to taunt him, to take up a proverb against that. As we continue on, we'll read exactly what that taunt is. So if we want to read verses 5 and go down through, let's read verses 5 through 9. Verses 5 through 9.
The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked, the scepter of rulers, which used to strike the peoples in fury with unceasing strokes, which subdued the nations in anger with unrestrained persecution. The whole earth is at rest and is quiet. They break forth into shouts of joy. Even the juniper trees rejoice over you, and the cedars of Lebanon, saying, since you have been laid low, no tree cutter comes up against us. Sheol below is excited about you, to meet you when you come. It stirs the spirits of the dead for you. It stirs the spirits of the dead for you, all the leaders of the earth. It raises all the kings of the nations from their thrones.
All right. So, these are the words of the Lord, but specifically this is the Lord telling them, this is what you will say in this time. So this is still the Israelites speaking to the king of Babylon. The Lord has broken the rod of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers, which the same rod and scepter in anger struck down peoples with unceasing blows, and in fury subdued nations with relentless aggression. So we see the visual of this great rod that was Babylon, that came and conquered and destroyed, that now it will be broken. And that all the lands and the rest, that all, after this rod is broken, that all the lands are at rest and at peace, and they break into singing. Even the trees, the same junipers and cedars that the Lord talked about were be cut down and then raised again with different trees, that even those trees will gloat over you and say, now you have been laid low, no one has come to cut us down. The trees will be rejoicing because they say, good, no more war, no one will be turning us into weapons, will be turning us into shields. That even the growth of the earth will celebrate the destruction of the Babylonians. The realm of the dead, or as I think your version said, Sheol. The underworld below is all astir to meet you at your coming. It rouses the spirits of the departed to greet you. All those who are leaders in the world, it will make them rise from their thrones. All those who are kings over the nations. The Israelites are saying, all right, judgment, the second part of the judgment is coming. Not only will you be destroyed and killed, but now the underworld's coming for you. The realm of the dead is all astir to meet you at your coming. It rouses the spirits of the departed to greet you, all those who are leaders in the world. It will make them rise from their thrones, all those who are kings of the nations. All these people that you've conquered and destroyed are going to be ready to meet you in the underworld. And so here, we see, in that time, the Israelites will not even necessarily think highly of themselves, but will sure be reveling in all the destruction of the Babylons. But here we see in the Lord's description of what will go down in that day that the Babylonians will have a response to this. That the Israelites will taunt the Babylonians, and the Babylonians will respond. Verses 10 through 14, they will all respond. They will say to you, the Babylonians will respond to the Israelites and say, you also have become weak as we are. You have become like us. All your pomp has been brought down to the grave along with the noise of your harps. Maggots are spread out beneath you, and the worms cover you. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of dawn. You have been cast down to the earth. You who once laid low the nations, you said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of the assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds, and I will make myself the Most High. So here the Babylonians have to remind the Israelites, good, now we're on your level. Now we're all the same. Even though we are being brought low, that you too were once thought yourselves the tip top of the world. You also fell into the same traps that we have. And here we see that the Israelites in their pride are forgetting exactly, as they watch the Babylonians be destroyed, they should be getting the slight feeling of deja vu. That the Israelites taunting the Babylonians are saying, we laugh at you because this happened to us first. And the Babylonians have to respond, you have also become weak as we are. And they remind them, you also thought to yourselves, I will ascend to heavens, I will raise my throne above the stars of God. Interesting wording he uses there, how the Israelites claimed, I will raise my throne above the stars of God. The Israelites thinking themselves higher than the celestial beings that the Lord has set up. They think of themselves on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon, and I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself the Most High. Babylonians have to remind the Israelites in this prophecy, you guys were just as haughty and prideful as we were. And it's almost that petty grudge that the Babylonians have now, of like, well, if we're going down, we're going to remind you exactly how low you are on the totem pole as well. But what's the difference here? The Israelites are the Lord's people. And that eventually the Israelites turn back towards God. Whereas this kingdom that still in its dying days just wants to drag another kingdom down with it. That's their dying gasp, is to remind the Israelites how low they are. But the Israelites, after their punishment, will sing a song of joy. After all this has come and gone, as we read in our previous lesson last week, that there will be a song lifted up to the Lord, who is the source of their salvation. That despite the punishment, that, we can go back, although you were angry with me, your anger has turned away and you have comforted me. Surely God is my salvation, I will trust and not be afraid. That the Israelites in their time, as the chosen people, had the Lord to turn back to. And that when that time came, that the Lord would lift them and bless them again. And even though they're in the midst of all this tumultuous, they conquered us and then someone else conquered them, all this war, all this craziness going on, is that at the end of the road, the Lord is still waiting with open arms. Just the path might be a little rough, and it might be a long one. But the Israelites will always have the Lord to turn back to. And so here Isaiah, again, to recap all of this, Isaiah wants the Israelites to know the Lord is just. The Lord is fair. The Lord makes sure to show equal love and punishment depending on if you follow his word or not. And then Isaiah also wanting to remind the Israelites, even when the Babylonians are down and out, you cannot turn to pride. You cannot turn to taking joy in someone else's suffering. What you need to be keeping your mind on is the Lord. That you can be on the path to redemption, but you can't let anything turn you away from it again. that even the slightest dig at another nation being destroyed is enough to turn you into the same prideful people that you were back then. And so in the same way, as we sing the songs of, count your blessings, make sure to keep your mind on things that are holy, that even though there are some people that do not follow the ways of the Lord, that they might have earthly gains. Or as Sing and Be Happy says, there are others living in sin, blessed with earthly gain. Take new courage, we cannot tell what tomorrow may bring. That sometimes things might not make sense to us in a Christian perspective. Some bad people that exploit others, leaders that take advantage of the needy, of the people who can't help themselves, might be rewarded with earthly gain. That even when they're knocked down to the lowest low, when they're punished for their crimes, for their sins, we still shouldn't take joy in seeing them brought low. We have to remember that the Lord is just, and that whether it happens right now, in the times where we are struggling, or whether it comes in times where we are prosperous and the evil are punished, we still cannot simply be caught up in the joy of watching someone else fail. Makes me think of a German term that I hear a lot. I'm really blanking on it now. Schadenfreude, taking pleasure in other people's suffering. How psychologists use that to describe, that sick pleasure that we get when we see someone drop a plate, or sitting out in the rain when we're warm inside of a home. That same feeling of almost the devil trying to weasel his way into the way that we view others. We can't let those feelings take over. That if we see someone in suffering, no matter what their history is, no matter what they've done to us in the past, when we see someone genuinely suffering and needing help, we show them the love of the Lord. And that it is a blessing to live in a time where instead of being the chosen people of God and having to watch the other kingdoms just be destroyed because of their sin, that now we are the prophets of the Lord. That we can reach out to those suffering, those who have been punished, and say, there is a better way. There is someone you can turn to that can help you get back not only on your path to prosperity, but on a path to peace, to make something even better than you had before. I think I'm 1 minute away from the timer, but any other thoughts or closing feelings about what we've studied this morning? Yeah.
It's very comforting to know that God is in control. We may not see the end results, but He does.
Yeah. God's plan is ever expanding to the point that, we can oftentimes only comprehend, even in our own lives, we don't know where we're going to end up. And yet God has set up every single person's lifetime, how they will affect others, what they will teach, what they will be an example of for generations on end, as far as we know. We know that there is a day coming where the Lord will return and take us up into heaven, but until then, He has every single aspect of His plan is being played out exactly as He has it. Any other thoughts? Well, in that case, almost perfect timing. Thank you all for a good class this morning. We are dismissed.